Okay, well, I guess I'll just get going then. I'm Elise Bernal, and huge thank you to Michael for planning this session. I know there are a lot of really cool speakers, many of which, hello, many of which are also speaking on the topic of food. But my topic today is future of food in a post-pandemic Earth. And in particular, I wanted to touch upon the subjects of alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and democratization of healthy food. So just by way of intro, again, my background is one in biotech manufacturing, so research around cancer therapeutics and diagnostics, and some small scale biotech manufacturing in the US, in Germany, and in France. And had a bit of a shift in my career when I started to learn more about the healthcare system in the US and how we weren't really doing a lot as far as preventive health in order to manage patient outcomes in the country. So I started looking at ways that I could address this, learned a bit more about factory farming, saw the effects that it had on human health, on environmental health, and the confinement and the disease that was brewing in these factory farms, the pollution, the effects that it had on the people that were housed around those areas kind of horrified me. And I thought, okay, if I really want to make a dent in healthcare, if I want to create better outcomes, I think we should start with food. So 2006, 2007, I started working on ways to improve the food systems in the US at first through plant-based eating, finding ways to make plant-based more accessible to consumers everywhere, because at the time there was very little availability of these foods and they were very expensive. So since then, I've been involved in investments in sustainable food, either through family offices or through foundations or just through investments that I've made myself. And it really wasn't until, I guess, May of last year that the plant-based investment movement even started getting attention by way of the Beyond IPO in May. And of course, I'm excited about all the new products that are coming into the market, but this is really like V1 of the iPhone. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And as an investor and as an impact investor and as a philanthropist, I'm really looking at ways that we can support the industry through upstream investments. So to me, that doesn't just mean investing in like the next Beyond or the next Impossible, but it's looking at ways that we can really improve the entire industry. And for me personally, that means exploring things like cellular agriculture and what we can do to bring down the cost of cellular agriculture, because nobody needs to be paying $1,000 for a cellular burger, but also to the extent that we can bring down the costs of other plant-based alternative proteins. I think that's going to become very important as we start to offer those types of foods in developing countries where they don't necessarily have the budget that some of us do to shop at Whole Foods. I think in a lot of my work, I've really focused geographically on Asia, and I hope that this format's okay. I just figured something informal as well would work. And to the extent that any of you have questions, please feel free to chime in on the chat. And I do have a few slides for everybody. But I found that in Asia, there was a sort of outsized contribution to factors around climate change to factory farming, and then of course the demographics, the population growth over there, for me made it a necessity to really find ways to help with that market. So I think it's also an interesting place to be investing, because if you look like at a country like Singapore, who is very vulnerable in terms of their food supply, who has to even rely on other countries to get their water, to get many of their food items, they're the ones that we're seeing are incredibly innovative when it comes to ideas around new approaches to food. So one of these is in the cellular ag space. They've got a few companies that are making meat from the cells of fish. One of those companies is Shiok, but very generally speaking, their sovereign wealth fund, Temasek, has spent an enormous amount supporting those initiatives. And as we look at the way that certain diseases have evolved in places like China, where a swine flu wiped out half their head of swine, which by some counts was between 200 and 300 million head of swine that either died from disease or had to be eliminated from this food chain. That created a proper food security risk for the country. So they've really begun looking at other ways to feed their constituents. And among those ways are the cellular ag and the alternative proteins. As it relates to COVID right now, and in a world where we imagine still having exposure to this virus, one thing that really jumps out at a lot of us is the incredible impact that nutrition and lifestyle has on your ability to build a healthy immune system. So when we're seeing that there are certain areas of the US, for example, that are experiencing underlying conditions or comorbidities that would make them particularly vulnerable to the coronavirus, we're seeing that a lot of those conditions are caused by the foods that they've been eating. And in a lot of the US, there are indeed food deserts that would not even really allow for proper access to what we'd consider nutritious foods. And this is certainly true in many parts of the world. For example, in the Philippines, where a lot of the food that's produced there just gets exported to other countries. Considering we have no vaccine, considering that we don't really have proper treatments for the coronavirus, considering that some experts believe that 90% of these predispositions could be just eradicated by proper diet and lifestyle, I find it unconscionable that a country would spend so little on preventive measures such as these and preventive health compared to, I guess, treatments, drugs, hospitalizations that come after the fact, when really the move from fee for service to fee for value in the US dictates exactly that we need to be managing patient populations in a better way. And even looking at some of these very well-meaning philanthropists that are donating food to children, when you see really the types of foods that are being delivered to these children, you think, good God, like this is exactly the type of food that's going to raise another generation of citizens that are going to be predisposed to diabetes, to hypertension, to cardiac disease. So if we're going to be making a change, it needs to be now, and we need to have policymakers participate in those changes. I don't know how familiar some of you are with, there's a study that basically links or compares the price of Twinkies in the US to apples. If I can, I'll just dig that up and share it with you guys in a minute. But basically, and Senator Cory Booker had mentioned this in a talk a few months back when he was still, in his run for president. But he thought that it was atrocious that in the US you could pay less for a Twinkie, or that it costs more to buy an apple than it does to buy a Twinkie, and that our policymakers are using sort of a defunct subsidy system that encourages farmers to make bad food for us, while the food that's good for us is just beyond beyond the price points for many of our vulnerable communities. So when I think of a post-pandemic world in terms of what the food system would look like, it would look like food prescriptions. Like there's currently a company called Zipongo that does actually write food prescriptions that would be paid for by your insurance company, that would allow for healthier food to be delivered to you. It would be nutritional education. It would be like no Twinkies. Yeah, you look at the crops that were subsidized, and you've got corn, you've got sugars, and I just can't imagine America being able to actually sustain the health outcomes, having the budget to sustain the health outcomes that come with people continuing to eat these foods and not paying attention to what it is they're putting in their bodies, because that's really all we have right now in fighting this virus is our immune systems. Let me see about sharing my screen and some of the slides that I wanted to show you. But again, do feel free to chime in with any questions. But yeah, moving towards systems that I think are not only more sustainable for humanity, are really systems that are more sustainable for our planet, because considering again the trajectory of increased meat consumption in places like Asia, given the amount of land that's left on the planet that's supposed to sustain these habits, I don't think that there are many scientists that imagine this as a viable option. And so to the extent that we can encourage shifts in nutritional behavior and encourage people to eat less meat, I think that will make a huge dent in outcomes, not only for their health, but for the planet. But in the meantime, what do we do about people that have decided that meat is just not something that they can part with? I think that cellular ag is absolutely one of those solutions. And by cellular ag, I mean growing meat from stem cells, putting them in bioreactors, and then being able to put together a hamburger or a fish patty that actually is real animal cells. And it's just like eating a burger, except you don't have the antibiotics and you don't have all the sludge that comes with the confinement around those animals. But the main issue in even getting that on our plates is really being able to scale that up. So part of my job as an impact investor is to find all the possible ways that we can address the issue of price. And to me, that's being able to scale up the growth media that's used for cellular ag. So basically the food that goes into the creation of the burgers, being able to feed the cells so that they can grow to a size that makes them into a burger or to a bone broth or to a fillet of fish. And that to me is something that, one, could help the entire industry because everybody needs to bring the cost down of the final product. But there's been very little work so far that's been done in that realm. And we're having to look in some pretty, I guess, strange places in order to find that type of tech. One of the places I've been looking is some of the stem cell work that's traditionally been done for humans is very much applicable to the cellular ag industry. So the growth media is in many cases the same, but you need to have it food grade. And one place that I've been looking is NASA. So by NASA, I mean they're sending stem cells up to the International Space Station, and they have found that stem cells actually proliferate in microgravity. And we now need to find ways, of course, that are scalable and that make sense cost-wise to get that kind of scale up down here on Earth. There are companies and researchers that are creating incubators that can increase the yield of the stem cells. And on top of that, there are a lot of academic institutions that are doing research on the growth media for these stem cells. But so far, they've all been used for human health, like growing human organs, or even honestly, just for aesthetic purposes, people wanting stem cell treatments because they want to look better. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I also think there needs to be a lot more transfer of technology so that we can get the cost of those burgers down, and fish products and what have you. That I think is a few years off, but if we could get the cost of those products down, many experts and many food think tanks believe that it could have an enormous effect on our ability to access maybe cleaner proteins, and it would have, of course, an enormous impact on the carbon footprint that meat has. In the meantime, this is not something, one, that everybody will want. In certain parts of the world, they are more excited about eating these cellular burgers than others. Asia is one of those places. Some parts of Europe, I think in the US, they've had mixed reactions to this. But when we're looking at local food, and I think this is something that we need to do so much better, not just in the US, but abroad. But in particular, my example is that of the Philippines. So spent the whole month of December there, would have gone back there, should have been back there now had the coronavirus not broken out. But what I found is, as I mentioned before, a lot of their foods have been harvested for export. Del Monte is a big agricultural partner to the Philippines. So basically you have like entire islands that are just one type of pineapple. And that, of course, isn't great for the soil. It's, I don't think, something that's great for the communities. It is a source of income for a lot of Filipinos over there. But what we could be doing is partnering, having public-private partnerships and partnerships with academia in order to encourage more farmers and to encourage a more diverse set of crops. I know that right now during lockdown, food availability and access is very poor, and the country has gone into a state of famine. But there are certain groups that have set up the infrastructure on a small scale, and I'd love to find ways to scale this up, but have been able to locally encourage farmers and even encourage children to start participating in farming. In general, I think we just need a lot more farmers to be excited about the industry. And there's a group in particular that I had met with a few times when I was over there that's doing some incredible work and encouraging Filipino children to explore the incredible world of farming. And they're starting to partner with other groups in forming farming coalitions, and co-ops is a big part of this. But they're also doing some cool stuff around tech that's used for them to distribute these goods to other parts of the Philippines. And I've got some pictures I'd love to show you guys. So let me just bring these up. Do my screen share. So here we have one of the farms. I believe it's in a place called Marinduque, where the children are taught about compost. They're taught organic methods for farming. And you can see there in the background, it says, "Welcome to the garden school." I would love to see initiatives like this pretty much in every state. I think that to the extent we can have more access to locally grown food and to get more people excited um, about farming in general and growing food, I think that will make a big difference when it comes to our future farming leaders. So this is my friend Cherry Atilano down there, the founder of Agrea. She grew up as a farmer in the Philippines and is the one that's running a lot of these programs with the kids where they're trying to make learning fun, I guess, when it comes to teaching them about different farming practices. And I had some cool pictures. They used like all these different colored tires to, okay, I actually had a presentation, but I decided to make it a little more informal. But yeah, so here, here you can see some of the tools that they're using, the recycling that they're using in order to get these farms up and running. Is they're just using recycled plastic bottles, painting them fun colors, using tires, and just making it a more pleasant experience for the kids. So when we're looking at ways just in the immediate term that we can encourage this type of work, and also just, you know, clearly in lockdown, they need access to food. We're really looking at higher tech ways to do this. I had mentioned the apps, and there are many different groups that are starting to look at higher tech ways to distribute their food. We found that in terms of equitable access to food, faith-based communities in certain regions, and I know this is true of the US, but it was particularly interesting to me in the Philippines to see the enormous role that the Catholic Church, for example, had in taking care of its communities by way of food. So I had been in touch with one of the priests there. His name is Father Beltran, and he had come up basically with an entire proposal that was centered around bringing fresh fruits and vegetables, like fresh produce, to the inner cities so that the poorest citizens of those areas could have access to better food, because he was seeing that a lot of his community members were struck with cancer. And while many of them weren't able to afford maybe some of the very expensive therapies that come along with having cancer, they did find that, of course, the food you eat has an enormous impact on your outcomes, and not just your outcomes, but in terms of prevention. And that's really what prompted that group to start their own farms and then deliver them. But then Father Beltran also came up with an online portal to be able to deliver these equitably to those that needed it the most. Does need to be scaled up, but looking into ways to support that. And yeah, basically, I think that this is, well, really disheartening to see the effect that a failed, we'll say, a failed healthcare system in the US and crumbling systems in other parts of the world have made for tremendous disease and suffering, not just for humans, but for the animals that are confined, and definitely for Mother Earth. It's, I think, a really, really exciting opportunity to help build things in a better way. And I hope that with that will come better health for all of us, and more inclusive, better health for the people on our planet. So yeah, I really appreciate the time that I was given by the Unconference to share this, and I'm really excited to hear some of the other speakers in this realm, and on so many different cool subjects. But yeah, if you have any questions, or if you want to follow up on any of this, if any of this is interesting to you guys, I can be reached on LinkedIn. So please do reach out. And definitely, if you have any solutions to any of this, MIT's challenge, they are doing not only a sustainable food challenge, but a COVID-19 challenge. So please feel free to submit, and I can give you guys information on that if you would like. But the applications are due June 18th. They've got close to $2 million in funding. And then, we work with a distinct group of funders that's looking at ways to support awesome initiatives in the sustainable food space, especially when it comes to equitable access.